Welcome to An Interview in History. Imagine a podcast that serves as a bridge across time, connecting listeners to the voices of history's most impactful figures. Each episode is a deep dive into the lives and legacies of these individuals, exploring not just their well-documented achievements, but also uncovering lesser-known facts that shaped their contributions to our world. From scientists who unlocked the mysteries of the universe to activists who fought for social change, each story is a testament to the indelible mark they left on society. This journey through history will not only educate, but also inspire listeners to appreciate the intricate tapestry of human progress. This week, on An Interview in History, we're talking with Alexander Graham Bell, born Alexander Bell, a Scottish-born Canadian-American inventor, scientist, and engineer who is credited with patenting the first practical telephone. He also co-founded the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, in 1885. This interview takes place on October 13th, 1921. Thank you for sitting down with me today, Mr. Bell. Let's begin by discussing your early life. Can you tell me a bit about your family?
Certainly. I was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on March 3rd, 1847, into a family deeply engaged in elocution and communication. My father, Alexander Melville Bell, was renowned for his work on phonetics, developing visible speech, a system designed to teach speech to the deaf. My mother, Elsa Grace Simons, though deaf herself, was an inspiration to me. She was an accomplished pianist which always impressed me deeply. My grandfather, Alexander Bell, was also a speech expert, so communication was at the very core of my family life.
That must have been quite an environment to grow up in. Could you tell us about your siblings?
Yes. I had two brothers, Melville James and Edward Charles. Unfortunately, both of them died of tuberculosis in their youth, which deeply affected me. I was the only surviving child of my parents, which added a certain weight to my life, both in terms of responsibility and in motivating me to accomplish something meaningful. I was born as just Alexander Bell. At age 10, I pleaded with my father to have a middle name like my two brothers had. For my 11th birthday, my father acquiesced and allowed me to adopt the name Graham, chosen out of respect for Alexander Graham, a Canadian being treated by my father who had become a family friend.
That's a lot to deal with at a young age. Speaking of which, what was your schooling like?
My formal education was somewhat erratic. I wasn't exactly what you'd call a stellar student, in the traditional sense. I attended various schools in Edinburgh and London, including the Royal High School of Edinburgh, where I wasn't very successful academically. But I was always fascinated by sound, speech, and the mechanics of communication. I spent a lot of time working with my father's visible speech system and assisting him in his work with the deaf. Later, I studied at the University of Edinburgh and the University College London, but much of my learning came through self-study and experimentation.
Mr. Bell, do you remember your first invention?
Of course. As a child, I had a curiosity about my world. I gathered botanical specimens and ran experiments at an early age. My best friend was Ben Herdman, a neighbor whose family operated a flour mill. At the age of 12, I built a homemade device to combine rotating paddles with sets of nail brushes, creating a simple dehusking machine that was put into operation at the mill and used steadily for a number of years. In return, Ben's father, John Herdman, gave us boys the run of the small workshop in which to invent. In my early years, I had a bit of a sensitive nature, and talent for art, poetry, and music that my mother encouraged. With no formal training, I mastered the piano and became my family's pianist. Though normally quiet and introspective, I reveled in mimicry and voice tricks akin to ventriloquism that entertained my family guests. I was also deeply affected by my mother's gradual deafness. She began to lose her hearing when I was 12, and I learned the manual finger language so I could sit at her side and tap out silently the conversation swirling around the family parlor. I also developed a technique for speaking in clear, modulated tones directly into my mother's forehead, whereby she could hear me with reasonable clarity. My preoccupation with my mother's deafness led me to study acoustics. I seem to remember hearing or reading something about you and the Mohawk Indian. Can you elaborate? Certainly. I continued my interest in the study of the human voice, and when I discovered the Six Nations Reserve across the river at Onondaga, learned the Mohawk language and translated its unwritten vocabulary into visible speech symbols. For my work, I was awarded the title of honorary chief and participated in ceremony where I donned a Mohawk headdress and danced the traditional dances. That's incredible. You mentioned your interest in communication and sound, which brings us to one of your famous achievements, your invention of the telephone. Can you tell us about that? Ah, yes, the telephone. My work in this area began with my interest in helping the deaf and my fascination with transmitting sound. In 1871, I moved to Boston to teach at the Boston School for Deaf Mutes, and it was there that I began experimenting with telegraphy. I wanted to improve the telegraph, which could only send one message at a time, by transmitting multiple messages simultaneously on the same wire. This concept, known as the harmonic telegraph, ultimately led me to the discovery that sound, including the human voice, could be transmitted electrically. On March 10, 1876, the first clear, intelligible words were transmitted through the telephone when I spoke to my assistant, Thomas Watson. I said, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." And to our amazement, the words came through the wire. That must have been an incredible moment. I understand, though, you didn't have a telephone in your study. Yes, that's right. I considered my invention an intrusion on my real work as a scientist and refused to have a telephone in my study. Tell me about the dispute with Elijah Gray. Well, Elijah Gray was also experimenting with acoustic telegraphy and thought of a way to transmit speech using a water transmitter. On February 14, 1876, Gray filed a caveat with the U.S. Patent Office for a telephone design that used a water transmitter. That same morning, my lawyer filed my application with the Patent Office. There is considerable debate about who filed first, and Gray later challenged the primacy of my patent. On March 7, 1876, the U.S. Patent Office issued me the patent. It covered the method of an apparatus for transmitting vocal or other sounds telegraphically by causing electrical undulations similar in form to the vibration of the air accompanying the said vocal or other sound. I returned to Boston that day, and the next day resumed work drawing in my notebook a diagram similar to that in Gray's patent caveat. On March 10th, I succeeded in getting my telephone to work, using a liquid transmitter similar to Gray's design. Vibration of the diaphragm caused a needle to vibrate in the water, varying the electrical resistance in the circuit. Although I was and still am accused of stealing the telephone from Gray, I used Gray's water transmitter design only after my patent had been granted, and only as a proof of concept scientific experiment, to prove to my own satisfaction that intelligible articulate speech could be electrically transmitted. After March 1876, I focused on improving The electromagnetic telephone had never used Gray's liquid transmitter in public demonstrations or commercial use. That's intriguing and unexpected. But your work didn't stop at the telephone. What other inventions or contributions are you proud of? Yes, the telephone was just the beginning. I was driven by curiosity. I worked on many projects, including the photophone, which transmitted sound on a beam of light, a precursor to modern fiber optics. I also developed devices to assist the deaf, such as the audiometer, and worked on principles of hydrofoils and aeronautics. Later in life, I became deeply interested in aviation and helped create the Aerial Experiment Association, which made significant advancements in early flight technology. That's fascinating to hear about all your inventions. Now, let's take a minute and talk about your personal life. You married Mabel Gardner Hubbard in 1877. Can you tell us about her and your family life? Mabel was remarkable. She was one of my students, deaf from the age of 5 due to scarlet fever. But she never let her deafness hold her back. She is intelligent, strong-willed, and supportive of my work. We married in 1877, and she became my anchor. We had 4 children together, 2 daughters, Elsie and Marion, and 2 sons who sadly died in infancy. Mabel was instrumental in shaping my life and career. She supported me in everything I did, from my work with the deaf to my scientific experiments. Mabel sounds like she was a wonderful partner. How did your life change in later years after your major successes? As I grew older, I am focused more on research and experimentation than on business. After the telephone became a commercial success, I haven't taken much of a role managing the Bell Telephone Company. Instead, I've spent time at our family home in Nova Scotia, where I continue to work on inventions. Now, in my later years, I'm dedicated to improving human life, whether through communication, aviation, or teaching. I believe that curiosity and a desire to help others are at the heart of a fulfilling life. After your major successes with the telephone and other inventions, how did you spend your retirement years? Retirement for me was never about stepping away from work. Instead, it meant shifting my focus to different kinds of experiments and research. I spent much of my later years in our estate in Baddeck, Nova Scotia, which has become my retreat and my laboratory. There, I work on a wide variety of projects. I've become very involved in aviation and hydrofoils, for instance. In fact, in 1909, the Silver Dart, a plane developed by Aerial Experimentation Association, which I helped found, became the first powered aircraft to fly in Canada. Another one of my passions during my retirement is developing faster boats. My work on hydrofoils has led to the creation of the HD-4, which set a world speed record for watercraft in 1919, reaching over 70 miles per hour. That was a thrilling moment. I also continue my lifelong interest in improving communication for the deaf. Although the telephone became my most famous invention, my heart is always close to education and improving life for the hearing impaired. I never truly retired in the traditional sense. I just moved on to other pursuits that fueled my curiosity. It sounds like your retirement was as innovative and as active as the rest of your life. Indeed, I believe retirement is just another chapter for me. It is filled with discovery and the joy of creation. Looking back, what do you hope your legacy will be? I hope to be remembered not just as the inventor of the telephone, but as someone who dedicated my life to improving communication, especially for those who face challenges, like the deaf. I want people to remember that the drive to help others and an unyielding curiosity can lead to remarkable achievements. My work has never been about fame or fortune. It has always been about discovery and making life better for others.
Thank you, Mr. Bell, for sharing your story. Your contributions to science and humanity are unforgettable. Your life and work will continue to inspire countless people around the world. Thank you. It's been my pleasure to share it with you, and thank you for remembering my story. It's been a pleasure. On August 2nd, 1922, at the age of 75, Alexander Graham Bell passed away from complications related to diabetes. While tending to him after his long illness, Mabel, his wife, whispered, "Don't leave me." By the way of reply, Bell signed, "No." He lost consciousness and died shortly after. His wife was by his side when he took his last breath. After his death, something very touching happened. As a mark of respect, every phone in the United States and Canada was silenced for a full minute. It was a poignant reminder of how much the telephone had impacted people's lives. And now, another forgotten history. Mark Twain held a pistol to his head, but he couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. So, he put down the pistol and picked up a pen. Many textbooks portray Mark Twain as poised, self-assured, and composed. However, the Twain described in his writings from 1865 and 1866 is far from that man. At this time, Twain was living in San Francisco and earning $100 a month, writing 2,000-word columns 6 days a week for a newspaper called the Territorial Enterprise. The 29-year-old Twain was struggling immensely. He was drowning in debt. The local pawn shops owned nearly all his possessions. In a letter from 1865, he wrote to his brother, "If I do not get out of debt in 3 months, pistols or poison for one. Exit me." He nearly took the first option. There are many stories about what exactly made him change his mind. His story describes how his eyes met a bill for coal he had received. The wording on the bill was so peculiar for such a low sum of requested money that it made him do a double take. It supposedly brought about a chuckle, and he reflected on the oddity of life, putting down his pistol. Some accounts claim that when he brought the pistol to his head, he couldn't bear to pull the trigger out of his thoughts of cowardice. Whatever the truth may be, we do know that the great literary figure had some very dark days in his lonely San Francisco apartment. Shortly after this incident, Twain hit his first home run. He finally leaned into his inclinations of humor with a celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. It was a humorous work that he published by the New York Saturday Press on November 18, 1865. It brought him his first taste of international fame. And the rest is history. Join us next week when we talk with that famous author of macabre tales, Edgar Allan Poe. Until then, take care.